Welcome to Mimir, the podcast for ambitious entrepreneurs who want to launch and grow a successful business from day one. I'm your host, Maddie Kelly, and each week I sit down with founders who have been there, done that. We dive into the mindset, strategies, and practical tools you need to turn your vision into a reality. So let's get to work. Hey guys, welcome back to Mimir. Today's episode, I am sitting down with Oana Jinga. I first met her at Manifest, where she was speaking on a panel about women in supply chain, and I immediately knew that she had to come on the podcast. Her story isn't just impressive, it's a masterclass in reinvention, resilience, and bold thinking. She started her career in PR and then moved into partnerships at Google, and today she is the co-founder and chief commercial officer of Dexory, a robotics company that is truly transforming how warehouses operate. So cool. I got to see their robotics in person at the conference and I was totally blown away. But in this episode, Oana and I dig into the real side of building something new, especially when you're entering a space where no one knows your name. You guys are going to learn how to pivot when your go-to-market strategy isn't working, the power of getting early champions to back your vision, tactics for gaining traction when you're the underdog, and what it actually takes to break into male-dominated industries and thrive. Her storytelling and background truly became a superpower in the world of robotics, and I cannot wait for you guys to listen to her story. Whether you're building in tech, logistics, or a completely different space, this is a conversation about how to stay grounded, get creative, and make your mark. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Oana to the podcast. I feel like your origin story is really interesting. You started in PR and then you were partnerships at Google, but now with Dexory, it's robotics. And I feel like that's a really interesting leap. And I would love to know how you took that turn.
Yeah, well, it's quite a long kind of journey on that one. I think I've always been really passionate about the tech sector, and I knew that I was going to work in technology at some point. I kind of grew up. I was kind of like a teenager during the first years of social media, and everyone was online. You kind of start realizing the power of community and technology and everything else. So I was always attracted to the sector. So I initially was going to study computer science, go into proper kind of technical development, do the whole engineering degree. But I think I started to kind of get attracted by kind of cooler professions, as they were calling them at the time, and probably still kind of some people see them as kind of shinier and kind of getting the spotlight. So I ended up studying PR marketing to obviously kind of help more on taking these products to market, engage with customers, organize the big events and so on. So I've done that, and at the end of it, kind of being pulled into Telefonica, which is a big kind of telco, but specifically into a team that looked after bringing digital products to market that were supporting kind of communication. Obviously, they're a telco, so everything was around obviously being on your phone. And from there, I was poached by Google afterwards. So I think it's it was a different turn into tech, but it kind of combined two things I really liked and cared about, which is the market PR side of things, and then the technology world. So it was quite a journey. But then as I was at Google, I had known my co-founders for a while, and they kind of started working on it's kind of slightly small robotics projects, experimenting with 3D printing, kind of thinking, okay, what can we do with this? And that's when I got involved in helping them actually kind of build a story around what they were building and figuring out, we are going to turn that into a product, who's going to buy it, how we're going to sell it, like pretty much all the go-to-market motions that I was doing in the big tech at that time. So it slowly then went from a weekend project into the company that it is today, but obviously a lot of steps in between.
No, I think that's really interesting, and something I hadn't yet considered, that there is really something to be said for the ability to bridge tech and market. Like, just because you have a really interesting tech product doesn't always mean that that's how the customers are going to receive it, or if even that's the best placement for it in the market. Like, I think we've seen so many examples where somebody has a great idea for a tech solution and then they input it, somewhere, and it doesn't really hit, but then you just plug it into a different section of the market doing a slightly different use case, and then all of a sudden it blows up. And I think it takes a keen eye to sort of understand the differences. So can you walk me through sort of when you had that moment with Dexory where you're like, oh wait, I think this is how we should be applying this tech?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of a bit of a, well, maybe a textbook kind of example of that, because before the pandemic, we used to work on retail stores. So we had a robot that would go around the supermarket, for instance, and scan products on the racks and the aisles in the supermarket, confirm what's in stock, what's not in stock. And that was going pretty well. Obviously, it was still kind of early days when it came to computer vision, to robotics. So we're quite like at the forefront of a lot of interesting technology. But with the pandemic, all the retail stores closed. So we were kind of left a little bit in limbo. We had just raised our pre-seed round at the time. So we were all kind of hyped up. And they're like, oops, we don't have a market anymore. And we were quite lucky because we had started to make a bit of noise in the market. And we had a number of the retailers we were working with at the time kind of coming to us. Actually, can you help us with a very similar use case, but within the warehousing space? And at that time, we knew nothing about supply chain and logistics. And we kind of, everyone's kind of perception is like stuff must be extremely accurate and very kind of detailedly put into the right place, because how else am I going to get my parcels, right? But actually, reality is very different. And especially with the pandemic, when everyone started panicking because they couldn't have enough people in the sites, obviously they had to restrict access and still fulfill a lot of orders, because obviously the industry was booming with all the online kind of and e-com exploding. So that's kind of probably when we learned about it even existing like as a use case in the warehousing space, and quickly trying to get our heads around what that means. Do a lot of shadowing in these warehouses, following people around, trying to understand what they're doing. And to your point, completely shifted in 2022. I've never kind of looked back since, to be honest. So you kind of have to always. Sometimes it's controversial, obviously, with startups, because everyone's telling you to focus, focus, focus.
Yeah.
But then if you're too focused, you don't see these types of opportunities, right? So I think we're on that kind of mindset that we're always kind of focusing, but with a little bit of a side eye into like what else is out there, and exploring kind of new avenues and new opportunities. But to your point, you kind of need to have a bit of that business mindset around. At the end of the day, we need to make money out of what we're building, rather than we're just making some really cool stuff that obviously no one's gonna really commercialize.
Yeah, and there's so much here that I am so curious about. I think first question is like, when you were shadowing warehouses, were these potential clients that you had sort of like already pitched and been like, this is what we're building and we think it could be an interesting use case for you? And then they're like, oh yeah, like come to our warehouses and check it out.
So the first ones were actually people that reached out to us to say,
cool.
can you help us with this? They were actually in the air cargo space. And the reason for that is when it comes to air cargo, there are very strict requirements when it comes to stock accuracy, because of them being bonded warehouses, obviously under customs review. So stuff comes into an airport, obviously lands to the country, and then it's still kind of the different kind of regulation bodies that have to make sure the products obviously are what it says on the on the shipping bills and so on. So for them, they have to do a full kind of stock check of the warehouse a number of times a week, and it's extremely kind of manual and time consuming. And while these warehouses are not that big, it's just a process that has to happen from an auditory perspective. So they were like some of the first that kind of took us into these warehouses and then showed us this is what we're doing. One of them was actually a customer of ours on the retail side. It's very, very different, being a bigger group. So that's kind of how we got the first stages. And we used that feedback and the understanding to then scope out the MVP. And then, to your point, kind of start to build it from there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm sure that through that you realized and like unpacked just how crazy the warehouse experience is and like what that actually looks like. And I think this is something that early stage founders who have physical products like don't realize, that when you get to a certain level, you have to start having warehouses. And that process, while like somewhat standardized, is still so manual. I mean, we're at a very exciting time now because I think a lot of that stuff is changing, and through tech, like it should be a little bit more streamlined and seamless. But I have heard horror stories of where the warehouses have these like big, physical like papers that you have to flip through in order to organize and categorize and keep track of all the stuff that's there. So I'm sure like when you guys did that, you're like, oh my God, this is a crazy opportunity for us to come in and create some efficiency.
And I think people, when you talk about warehousing and logistics, it's quite interesting though, because it's a startup. Obviously, we talk to a lot of investors, right? And with all due respect, they're financial people. Most of them have never even heard of a warehouse or stepped foot inside the warehouse. So everyone kind of has this kind of idealistic view that the typical kind of short clip of a corner of an Amazon warehouse that's completely automated and everything is arms and kind of robots moving goods and so on. I mean, the reality of the sector is like probably 0.02% of it, maybe even less than that, is anywhere near that level of automation and digitization. And we still very much kind of have customers that don't even have a warehouse management system, or that, to your point, write kind of the ID of the pallet on a piece of paper that they stick it with a little sticky tape onto every single pallet. And sometimes you're thinking like, how is this still possible in today's day and age? But it's just kind of the sector does take a while to adopting, and also this kind of fear of moving away from a process in case it starts to break down. And then obviously for them the most important thing is get items out the door. So they're like, well, we implement this, what if we're going to mess this up? So yeah, it's a very interesting kind of dynamic, I think, in kind of having the whole spectrum of customers, some that are still extremely manual and some that are kind of like top edge of the innovation side.
And you brought up founders, which I'm glad you did, because this is something I was really curious about and wanted to chat with you. What has your guys' experience been like? I know, or at least I can imagine that, it's a capital intensive space, and to get started in those early days to build MVPs, you probably needed an influx of capital. And so, how did you go about pitching like a pre-seed and pre-MVP product to people who, like you said, really aren't super familiar with what the actual problem space?
Yeah, it was challenging for sure. I think going back to it, there's a combination of things that made our company quite kind of hard to get that first investment. And number one is we have a hardware element. Mm-hmm. And probably about 6 years ago, when we were kind of discussing the first investors, they were like, no one invests in hardware because it means supply chains, production lines, complexity. Oh my God, no way. Everything was SaaS. Everything is kind of like, cloud platforms and so on. So that kind of made it quite an interesting challenge. And then the second part was obviously robotics and automation for industrial kind of use cases, which again, if people don't, I'm kind of like not even a little bit close to the warehousing space, they're not going to get it. So kind of making them understand the pain point you're trying to address, again, very, very big challenge. And then the third one, I think, we're all kind of first time founders, quite young, obviously with big vision. So I think when we combine all of these, it was quite an interesting journey. And the first time we spoke to investors, to be honest, they kind of told us, we were at that time still kind of working on the retail side of things, so more kind of a little bit more in the consumer world where people still understand a little bit what you're talking about. And they were like, well, sounds cool, but it's going to be too complicated. So we went away. We actually got quite a bit of grant funding. So here in the UK, and also at the time we were in the EU. Brexit happened since, but there were a lot of pockets of money for innovation and R&D. So we applied for some of these grants. We actually raised just over 3 million euros at the time. Wow. That enabled us to start putting a team together, start kind of buying materials, machinery that we needed to build those first MVPs. We did that, went and got the first customers, and then actually went to some of the same investors for our pre-seed, and they're like, "Oh my God, you've actually done this. This is crazy. Yes, here's some money." It wasn't easy, and we had to kind of find alternatives ways of funding that.
That's super interesting, though. I, as a co-founder myself, and we're just going through our first family and funds round, that was something I completely forgot existed. That there are definitely scrappier ways to be able to get funding that's not bootstrapped, but also not necessarily investing. And I personally want to hold on to capital as much as possible without diluting equity, especially in the early stages, because it just makes things more complicated. And I feel as a founder, you want to hold on to that as long as you possibly can, even if you need capital to keep going. So I'm definitely going to do some Googling after this, but did you find it through small businesses, or was it more through the industrial sector, or both, a little bit of a combination of a Venn diagram?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, I mean, because you're based in the US, so I don't know all the kind of environment there, but I think in the UK and Europe, there's still a lot of kind of public funding available, so through the government, different bodies. And here in the UK, there's a whole organization called Innovate UK that is particularly kind of focusing on this. Every month or every quarter, I mean, they have kind of continuous what they call kind of calls for projects, and based on what they're seeing in the country as being kind of key needs, it could be industrial, it could be more consumer focused. They kind of create these calls for projects, and they assign kind of funding for that, and you just kind of go through an application project and obviously kind of get granted or not. But it's very much kind of public focused. There's also some organizations that are kind of more private and obviously linked to some of the big corporates in the market that would have similarly like that, but they would want to have like pilots that you could do with them, and as part of that you get a bit of funding to co-develop a product. So it does vary a lot market to market, and I think that was kind of one of the good things, and I feel like about Europe and the UK, is that there is that pocket of money to get you started, and you do need to. I think initially, like we applied and it kind of happened that we're lucky and we got it, but then we kind of started learning how to best put our applications together, like what would be things that we need to make sure that we think about and we include. Because if you just kind of go at it blindly, there's certain things that obviously they would want to see in there, and you have to make sure that you've considered them.
Okay, interesting. I feel like that's kind of like a founder learning lesson, is that you won't know that until you've done it the first time. Exactly. And it's just something that you have to learn by through experience. I'll probably also, I'm sure like there's a way to ask ChatGPT if this application
100%,
makes sense for what they're trying to look for,
We didn't have that back then, everything was kind of like manual that you had to write forever. So
So since then, I'm curious because I like supply chain adjacent. How has it been getting the product to market? Like, what do you think have been successful marketing tactics? Like, for my 9-to-5 job, our like best performing channel is either like, cold outreach or events, and like paid search. And like, that's pretty much it. And I think it's a really interesting market case because like it's just it's hard to market in this space, I think, because it's so old school and like it's very trust based. So for you guys like coming in as like the new kid on the block, like, was that a challenging experience as well? Like what have been your performing channels and what was your strategy?
Definitely challenging because, like you said, first of all, we had a different name. We were called Bots and Us, like robots and us, so like very kind of consumer focused in a way, up until 2022, and then we rebranded at the end of the year to Dexory. So not just that we had obviously like we're new on the logistics space, but even our company did not exist before that with that particular name. So a lot of people are like, who are you guys? And I think the one thing that worked for us, again, going back to your list, events for sure, because people in the sector do like to touch, feel, see something rather than just kind of doing demos online and things like that. So we jumped on the events kind of roadshow very early in the company, even before we had a product, trying to kind of get some meetings, understanding, like get ourselves out in the market. And that's probably kind of still the biggest investment in our marketing pot, to be totally transparent. And then as soon as we got the first customers in, just keep using their kind of case studies, keep asking them for permission to obviously kind of get them to talk about your solution. We're in a fortunate position now because we have quite a lot of them and they're all kind of happy with the solution, so they're obviously kind of shouting about it a lot. But I think in those early days, once we got the first one in, and that was actually these guys, Menzies Aviation on air cargo, their name, and then being able to get them on a reference code and open more doors, and that expanded and so on. So until you land that first customer, it's quite hard. And we landed them, I think Alex said, because they kind of reached out to us. But then the first few ones after that, there was a lot of cold calling and a lot of kind of begging, trying to explain, trying to hunt them down, everything that you just mentioned, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think probably the majority of people listening are used to traditional methodologies and like adoption rates. But it's something I really enjoy about working in the supply chain is I feel like everything in supply chain is like a hard use case. And anything you can take away from that, like it's a lot easier in other, different industries. And so, like for anybody listening, these are interesting tactics to try because it should be like much more easy to implement and much more effective. Whereas like in supply chain, you're always like sort of begging and like crawling, and you really do need that like one champion customer. But even if you're, not in the supply chain, like to have that first customer that can become your champion. So it's kind of like put all your effort in there, like nurture them, like really make sure that they're getting the best experience because they're going to be your champion out into the space and hopefully be able to drive like pipeline back. So then that way you guys can, improve and expand your customer base from there.
And I think I've had a few people also kind of joining us from different sectors, and like one of our VPs actually came from the retail sector. I mean, still selling obviously technology and SaaS products to the big retail players,
Yeah.
which would still say like it's relatively still traditional to an extent, because obviously you've got the brick and mortar stores and everything else. But yeah, when she joined after a few months, like this is very difficult because I never really know where I stand with a lot of these guys. Whereas like in my previous experience, it's kind of like, yeah, follow this process. You kind of know if it got to this place, it's gonna probably close.
Yeah.
So yeah, whereas like in the supply chain world, there's always something else you haven't thought about, or somebody else that kind of comes in, or some particularity of this particular warehouse you want to go live in. So I think, yeah, you of course you learn and you kind of create your own flags and nuggets that you know that you can kind of like bank on. But initially it was a lot of that. I mean, well, none of the theory I knew before works anymore because this is a madness. But then you kind of find your way through that. And to your point, you understand, okay, kind of think I know what works now to an extent, but still leave yourself a lot of room to flex. And the one thing we do a lot is we constantly make sure that we have enough in the pipeline to be able to have a lot of deals going in parallel because of that uncertainty. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you go to a store, you try on, 18 pairs of pants, knowing that like probably one or two will fit, but you have to like increase that original number. But I'm also kind of curious, like, do you feel like your previous experiences really like prepared you to some degree for this role that you're now in? Or do you think that it was also like a steep learning curve, or probably both?
It's interesting in the sense of like, I've got my kind of my founder hat on, and then I've got my chief commercial officer hat on and my chief product officer hat on. So I think it depends because as a founder, like nothing can prepare you for being a founder. Once you think you've nailed it, then something else happens, and you're like, oh, wait a second, this is all this pot of challenges here that I haven't even considered before. Because yes, the company is growing, but now you have a lot more pains to think about: people drama, customer drama, a lot of other things. So, and plus, you have to kind of make sure that you still obviously run the company and that obviously.
Yeah.
Fundraising, everything else. So for that, I don't think anything can prepare you until you kind of go through it. But there's definitely a lot of elements around my other two roles. So I think from a product perspective, my work at Google and also to an extent at Telefonica, I used to do a lot of kind of product work and working closely with the tech teams and scoping, getting requirements in, testing, kind of everything else that we do on that side. And then on the commercial side, to an extent, yes, because I used to work at Google, for instance, with most of the big retail brands across Europe, and having to deal with them at C-level kind of taught me a lot on how kind of to in a way appear in front of our customers at Dexory as well. Of course, there you rely on a massive brand that everyone knows and everyone wants to work with, and then to the conversation earlier, you're like, hi, we're here. Like, oh, you again? Yeah. So versus like, here, Google's here, like, yes, please, come on, here's a red carpet. So yeah, it's a very different experience.
Building credibility is like the one question that I always have. It's so, I wish that I think I've been always trying to create like a blueprint to establish credibility, because this, I think, is a consistent struggle that a lot of founders face. And it's the number one thing that you're trying to do when you first, are starting a company, even before sometimes you have a full product. Like from the beginning, first thing you want to do is establish credibility and somehow be able to get people to trust you and your product. And as a first-time founder, it's even harder. Like if you had previous things that you had done before, you can sort of rely on that. Or, like if you come from a company before, like you rely on that, which it's necessary to do. And like, it's something I would totally do as well. But how do you build credibility as a new company and a new founder?
I think it's about going back to those first customers, making sure that you're very transparent in what you can offer them, and then that you offer them, ideally that you overachieve on what you say you offer them. Because regardless of the relationship that you build and how nice the person is on an individual basis, and they really kind of genuinely want to help you, unless you show that business value, it's not going to go too far. Like, yeah, if they're going to be asked by other like people doing reference calls with them, and they start grilling around like business cases and stuff like that, at some point I think it's not going to align. So to me, that's the most important thing is like, if you commit to something, just make sure you deliver it, and then slowly you kind of start piling up on that, and you see that keeps growing and growing and starts multiplying through their networks. But it's so important in the beginning to be quite confident that, again, it doesn't have to be like a perfect result, as long as you tell them like, this is going to be like 60% done. and this is what we could do right now. Yeah, we could grow afterwards, but don't go in saying like it's going to be 80 and then deliver 60, because again, just kind of setting those expectations wrong is going to mess up that credibility.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest one for me.
What do you think about the adage that's like under promise, over deliver? Or do you think that's a better approach, or do you think it's more just like we're going to deliver 60 and then you deliver 60, but best case scenario you deliver 70?
I think it's better to be transparent rather than, because then you kind of set up the precedence that you're always going to over deliver, and sometimes you just won't be able to, and then people are going to be like, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? So I feel like kind of being transparent and like, look, I think we could get to 60. We might be able to 70, but there might be like, certain kind of things that have to align, and stars being in the right place and everything else. But I wouldn't go with 60 knowing that we could do more than that and then say, oh, surprise. I'm all for that transparency and the working together with the customer.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm also very curious, since you're a first-time founder, like I'm sure been a lot of leadership challenges that you faced. Like you said, like nothing really prepares you for that experience, but you guys have grown a lot very quickly, which is so incredible. But what kind of challenges have you faced from that perspective?
Oof, where do I start? There's so many different elements, and like every single day you're like, I thought we've got this, and we don't have it. Like, no. Or definitely not for this level, because we had it like 3 months ago and now I don't have it anymore. So if probably the biggest thing is finding the right leadership team. And we obviously, like, you kind of get to a level of 20, 30 people, and you start getting your first kind of people managers in, and it's very important that the people that you get underneath yourself as a founder to, in a way, relay your message to the rest of the team and make sure that everyone's delivering are the right people.
Yeah.
And also, if they're not, like, that you very quickly make a decision on that, because your team is gonna like be, what are you doing? Basically.
Yeah.
So that's probably gonna always be the biggest challenge, is how do you multiply yourself as a founder by bringing the right people in.
Yeah.
Secondly, like, as you start growing, how do you then keep everyone accountable to the same goals? Again, it does rely a lot on those managers to be the right people, but also for you as a leader to set those goals and make sure they're ambitious but still relatively achievable. And I think on that we're focused so much on high performance and high achievements, and I feel like we're always feel like we're a step behind where we should be. But actually, if you judge that by other standards, we're like, oh my god, you're do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, how do you find that balance to not get people to be demotivated because they always feel like they never really achieve everything, but still kind of keep that ambition high. And I think that a lot of that I've kind of like brought over from Google, for instance. And then also, I think realizing that maybe you're not an expert in everything anymore, and making room for those experts. I think that's something that as founders we struggle a lot with, because we're so invested in everything, heart and soul, that it's hard to obviously let go. But with scale, otherwise it's just like you become a bottleneck, and that's not healthy. So I could go on and on forever.
Yeah, and like that's never what you want. Like, you start a company because you probably have like faced bottlenecks before, and you're like, like if I could just do this by myself, it would be so much faster and easier. But I never thought about hiring as like a way to multiply yourself. I think maybe I had a misconception in that as a founder, you are always driving the vision, but inevitably you're not as close anymore. And especially as you start to hire on, like, you just, I think, inherently becomes somewhat removed because of the title that it comes with. And like, I've seen it both ways, where you get a really awesome manager who can execute your vision in a way that makes it so easy for you to be hands off, because there's trust built there, where the founders like, I really believe that you can carry this across the line, and that you understand where I'm trying to go and like what we're building here, and you're excited about it. And then I believe, like, based on your experience, that you can really take this and run with it. And I've also seen it the other way, where it's sort of like silence, I think, is probably the best way that I can describe it. Like, it's not that they're not doing their job, but there's just sort of like a silence there that doesn't inspire the rest of the team to also get super excited about what's going on. And that is probably like really the most stressful from the founder's perspective to have that instead of somebody that can really drive and help you get the team motivated and excited.
And I was listening to a podcast, I think actually this morning on the drive to the office, around particularly that, about how you should make decisions around what leaders you keep and you don't keep. And I think that was one of the points there around, like, if you don't hear about them, pretty much a bad sign, because if you brought a leader in the company and you don't hear their voice, you don't hear their opinions, you don't hear other people saying that they're having an impact, then it probably means that, to your point, something is wrong there, and that it's not kind of landing. And another point that I kind of learned the hard way, I think, when I joined Google initially, which is I was trying to like really be independent and do my job and kind of deliver the results, but I wasn't really probably communicating with my manager at the time. And she had to kind of let go of a few projects to me, and she was feeling frustrated because she thought that they're not progressing, whereas they are, but I wasn't kind of keeping her in the loop. So that's something that I've learned a lot, and I feel in a way you build that a little bit with people that you bring in. And I do have areas of the business where I'm completely hands-off, completely trust the person, but it took a while to build that. And that person also kind of makes an effort to make sure that, at least not necessarily that she shares it, but that I know where I can find the latest on something if I feel like I need more information. And kind of I can self-serve on it, but she always kind of consistently updates things in particular areas, so that if I have any doubts, I know exactly where to go to, and then I'm like, she's on it, then all fine. And I think that's where sometimes as a leader, as you're saying, and if you feel like you don't know about something, that makes you panic. And immediately you kind of think like, oh, it hasn't been done, right? But even if the person would have done it, like, and it doesn't have to be too granular. And like I said, as long as it's somewhere that gets kind of monitored, and you can just have a look, and then all cool. I think that works.
Or just like a simple ping to be like, hey, if you need to figure this out, or like if you want an update on this, I can go into more depth, but like TLDR, it's here. And I think that's such a great point, because I'm sure that I relate a lot to that. Like, I think that there sometimes is an insecurity where you're like, I don't want them to think that I'm not performing well, or that like I'm needy, or like whatever it is, to be like, oh, like I'll just do it, and if they ask me about it, I'll tell them, because you're like, oh, I don't want to bother them or something like that. But I always think over communication is better than under communication.
100%, completely agree on that. And I think depending on where people come in from, and the type of managers they had before, obviously there's some habits that you need to realign, and then understand what works for this new setup and what works for this new company you're in, because some would be kind of used to being completely left on their own and doing their own thing, and then they're like getting panicked, like, oh, do I have to manage up or things like that? I'm like, you're not managing up, you're just kind of making sure that we have a collaboration here so that I can help you at the end of the day. Because most of the times when a leader asks a question, is not to kind of finger point and say, oh, there's a gap here. It's more like, genuinely, like, can I help you move this faster? Like, is there something I can do to help you there? So that's something that you kind of build with time, I think. So very, very important.
I think like communicating and connecting on just a human level makes such a difference with your manager. Like, I haven't always had the best managers, not to say that they were bad, but they also like just weren't great. And I think when I have a great leader, the difference is that they understand me from like a human perspective. I think they can see my anxieties and like understand where they come from, and also like understand how I work. And then they sort of can make better decisions around how to support me better. And I think that has been sort of an unlocking moment for me, where I'm like, oh, I think it's just sometimes I feel like it's not about the work. Like, I think it's about the people, and not just necessarily about the product that we're building, but thinking about them from like a holistic perspective, and how you interact with them, that then encourages like better work ethic, I think.
Yeah. No, completely agree that. And I think as we scale, this is us kind of reflecting on, because in areas where that clicked, and it sometimes very fast, sometimes like it took a little bit, but once that was in place, that area is like delivering perfectly. Everyone is pretty much aligned. Of course they have ups and downs, but the whole kind of culture, the subculture in a way of the team, works very, very well. And I think the quicker you can kind of get the right person in place, first of all, to be able to run that, and then get the others to adapt to that kind of new leader coming in, the faster you're going to get to this kind of spot. And some areas you probably might never will, but that's exactly the point of as the company grows, it's not necessarily that there's subcultures, as I was calling it, but you kind of have different ways that the teams will work, naturally evolving, and figuring out how to best balance those, especially like a company like ours that's extremely cross-functional. Obviously, we produce robots, we deploy them, then support them. There's like a lot of coordination that has to happen non-stop. And if the teams don't also understand how to work with each other and they kind of stay in their bubbles, that also is a pretty big issue. So yeah, it's a part of the pains of scaling.
Yeah, that's actually such a good point. Is like that I think is something I've also noticed is that the teams also operate very differently, and you have to figure out how and who to plug into the different spaces to like let those pathways flow. But it's, you know, it's an evolving challenge, and as a founder, it's never going to stop, and it's just going to be different problems, but different day, you know, like it is what it is. But last question I want to make sure that I ask you is what is your vision, also just purely curious, for Dexory, like not just for a product perspective, but I think the supply chain is such a fun space to be in right now. The people I think at the forefront of different aspects or avenues within the supply chain are like, you know, a few years from now going to be really like industry definers. So I'm curious to know like what your guys' strategy looks like what is the vision for you guys in that space?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different angles. I think first of all, we launched this product about 2 years ago, and it was a completely new use case for robotics, pretty kind of new. I would say even for sites themselves, like no one had really thought about automating inventory management at the time. So you kind of had to do a lot of education, a lot of mindset shifting around this is an area I should look at. Actually, like just the simple kind of automation of it is going to bring so many benefits. And across 2023, we did a lot of kind of that groundwork. The 2024 kind of took off significantly, and it helped us expand geographically quite a lot.
Yeah.
So we are based in the UK, for those of you who don't know. And from here, we expanded into Central Europe and then into the US about a year and a bit ago. And the US kind of took over significantly after that. And went towards the Middle East as well a little bit, and like APAC. So it's kind of, I think that the vision from that perspective is the company is growing geographically. And with that, we're encountering, first of all, a lot of interesting challenges with how warehousing and supply chain varies a little bit country by country, what operations are being, how operations run differently, what the needs are. So there's some adaptability angle that you have to look at from that perspective. How you sell to different cultures, like typical kind of playbook from that perspective. And then as the more warehouses we add to our pipeline and to our deployed list, the more data we collect. So it became quite evident very quickly for us that outside of the simple kind of integrity, as we call it, kind of looking at the inventory side of things, there's a lot of information we have about how the sites can be much more efficient, how we can optimize the space much better, how we can optimize walking routes, picking locations, and everything else. So that kind of opened basically a whole new set of use cases and a whole new area to explore. But we're kind of like back a little bit to square one because no one had this amount of data before, and everyone's like, "What do I do with it?"
Yes.
And then kind of you have to, first of all, kind of anticipate what they could do with it and make some assumptions, and then educate them towards those assumptions. And as you learn more, keep adapting. So we're never kind of getting bored of this kind of product iteration because while the inventory side is kind of working very well and obviously deploying and growing, we are now kind of in this new category, which is significant for the company because there's a lot of value in there for the customer, a lot of money for us as well to be made. But we're setting the playbook and the discussion in that angle. But it feels like people get it much more than they did like about 2 years ago when we started with the robotic side of things, because everyone's talking AI, everyone's talking about agents and all of that. So we'll see how quickly that takes off.
No, but that's such a good point, is that the founder journey is like you have a product, but what you're really doing is entrenching yourself in a problem space, and it's always just constantly learning. So it's sort of like you start at the surface level with whatever you think is going to work, and then through that you just start like digging and digging and digging, and every new you know challenge you encounter or product that you launch within that space, you're just like digging deeper into the problem and understanding it at its core and trying to solve the problems that exist within the entirety of that. It's almost like an iceberg. Like the first is just the tip, and then everything else that's underneath that is also still there for your learning and constant development, which is just so much fun.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me and sharing your expertise and your experience. I really appreciate it.
No, totally my pleasure. And yeah, really lovely to chat to you. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening. All the links to connect with Oana are in the show notes. I really want to hear from you guys. If you're enjoying the episodes, hit that 5-star rating, or if you're feeling up to it, leave a kind review. If you have questions you want answered, comment them in the reviews, and I will answer them at the end of the episodes. If you want more from me in the mirror, follow me on social media at Hi Maddie Kelly. You can also head to my website, mirror.ink, for contact info, partnership opportunities, and key takeaways on all the episodes. I will see you guys next week.